You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I'm Stephen Willis, host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and I'm going to be joined today by Derek Vandygriff. And before we get started, Derek Vandygriff, July 2nd, are you coming down?
Man, I just might wait to hear a location and get my work schedule. Usually I'm off that entire week. So if I'm off that week and I can take a couple days travel down, yeah, I'm absolutely going to.
Yeah, because it looks like it's going to be in Madison.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm usually off that whole week, so that usually leaves me pretty wide open. So yeah, there's a pretty good chance you'll see me down there.
Nice. Awesome. And that is all of the good news for this show, because this is an Ole Miss basketball show. And right now, Ole Miss basketball, they're part of a math problem, and it's not a good math problem. Now, you can do the math to get into the tournament, and Derek's about to let everybody know what needs to happen. But if you do not sweep against Auburn this weekend, this is over.
Yeah, and that actually, Steve, it's a lot worse than you let on just then, because this is actually an Ole Miss baseball program instead of a basketball program, right? I mean, if it was basketball, then, we've got all of these things to look forward to with Chris Beard and the transfers he's got pulling in here. Unfortunately, this is a baseball problem with the math. It all starts tonight on Wednesday against Mississippi State. You've got to take the Governor's Cup, right? It doesn't go down in the books as an SEC win. Committee always views it as one, though. But yeah, you go on the road to Auburn. You got to take 3 against Auburn, and then you got to come back home against Texas A&M, and you have to get one of those games. And then we travel to a place where Ole Miss plays really well all of a sudden, Baton Rouge. We've won 5 out of 6 down there, Stephen. So going down there and winning 2 isn't really that hard to believe, especially LSU's playing. But again, all of those points become moot if you don't beat Mississippi State on Wednesday night and you don't take 3 against Auburn. Because if you don't do those things, you're counting on a team that has not played well at home, has not showed any consistency offensively to score runs, to come home and take a series against the number 1 team in the country in Texas A&M, who does score a ton of runs. I don't know if you saw it last weekend. Georgia had them down 9-0 in the first inning, and that game ended in 7 innings after A&M run ruled them 19-9. Those guys can absolutely smash and score a ton of runs. Rebels are going to have their work cut out for them here in a couple weeks. But first things first, we got 4 huge games ahead of us, and we need to win all 4 of them, bottom line.
Yeah, and you've got the Governor's Cup tonight. About the time, honestly, you watch this video, or when it goes live, that's about the time the Governor Cup is starting. Let's say Ole Miss gets through that one. They've had a pretty good amount of success in the Governor's Cup in recent years. Not in the series, but in the Governor's Cup.
Yeah, well, we the last one we've won was 2022, I think it was. Really good year for Ole Miss baseball. It'd be nice to go ahead and, a 7-14 Ole Miss team take a midweek win against Mississippi State. That way we can start replicating 2022 a little bit, get that ball rolling downhill, so we can start collecting a little bit of momentum like we did.
When's Kevin Graham coming back?
Yeah, and Bench and Elko and DeLucia and all those guys, right? Yeah, it's a little different deal right now. But yeah, look, you got Grayson Saunier on the mound. One thing I thought was interesting, right? And again, when y'all watch this, the game's going to be starting to get going and everything. The lineup changes he had kind of blew my mind a little bit. We've got Luke Hill back at short, whatever. Randall's not hitting a whole lot, so they end up putting Burford in there. I don't understand why you don't pull Leger out of left field, put him at second base right there, and if you've got to have Jackson Ross in the lineup, toss him out in left field and get Trayson Hughes out there in right, because ever since he's been out of the lineup in right field, Jackson's a heck of a hitter, obviously, but defensively we take such a hit out there with Ross in right field instead of Trace and Hughes. And this is a team that can't take hits on defense anywhere. I don't care where it's at right now. So if you are going to play the shuffling game where you're going to pull Randall out and put Luke Hill back at short, bring Leger in, put him at second base, throw Jackson Ross out and left, and get Trace and Hughes back in there in right field, and at least have an optimal defensive lineup with the bodies you're going to end up having in there. But we'll see how all that plays out tonight. I have no doubt that by the time this game's over with, I'm going to end up looking like a complete idiot by the way it plays out.
Usually, but hey, Ole Miss goes and gets to play the worst team in the Southeastern Conference against a team that shouldn't be the worst team in the Southeastern Conference. They've been to Omaha like 2 out of the last 3 years. Playing at Plainsman Park, that's a difficult chore, especially with the way that Ole Miss pitches the ball.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We'll talk about Auburn being the worst team in the SEC record-wise and all that. They're 3-18, obviously not very good. 16-10 at home. Started looking at numbers and all over the last couple of days with Auburn, and I hate to say it, they're actually above Ole Miss in a lot of them, which was pretty shocking to me and a little bit of a gut punch. But they do not pitch the ball well at all, right? One thing they do well offensively is they run a lot. They're really good at stealing bases. They run a lot. Only gotten thrown out 10 times so far this year and still ranked third in the SEC in stolen bases. But when you get to the pitching side of it, they're 12th in ERA. Yes, that's still one spot ahead of Ole Miss, but we're not talking about Ole Miss right now. We're focusing on Auburn right now. So 12th in ERA, last in opponents' batting average, 13th in strikeouts, dead last in hits allowed, home runs allowed, and have the third most wild pitches. Somehow they have more wild pitches than Ole Miss does, which always seems to be a little bit of a thorn in our side every single weekend, it seems. But yeah, they don't pitch it real well. Now they got a couple guys that can absolutely rake though. You got Cooper McMurray's hitting 229 with 12 home runs and 12 doubles, playing first base, and Ike Irish, the catcher's hitting 326 with 11 home runs and 9 doubles. So those are the two guys you need to look out for on the offensive side of the ball. And hopefully this Ole Miss lineup can show a little bit of life and more than anything, a little bit of consistency, right? Last weekend you end up getting run ruled on Thursday night, come back in just a real greedy win on Friday to take that game 9-8, and then just lay an absolute egg offensively on Saturday. And, it ended up dropping that series to Alabama, right? So we need more offensive consistency. We need to get hits when we get runners on base, in particular in scoring position. And we need to start taking advantage of those situations, which is something we haven't done, quite frankly, all year, especially in conference play.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first and listen every day. When we come back, Derek will let us know his top 5 SEC football coaches, just like we have been doing all week long. Remember, mine's tomorrow. I'll let you know what's going on there. But first, guys, I need everybody to listen up to this huge announcement. I have been tracking the leaderboards every day, keeping my eyes on the score, putting my heart into it, and I'm super pumped to announce I'm finally on top. That's right. Obviously, I'm talking about the hit mobile game, Monopoly Go. You've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It's a great mobile twist on the classic Monopoly. You can play anywhere, anytime. You explore hundreds of Monopoly boards from Las Vegas to Camelot to the freaking moon, all the while raking in a huge fortune. Charge rent on iconic properties just like Monopoly, or go after your friend's Monopoly money by pulling bank heist and taking your wrecking ball to their landmarks. But my favorite part is the leaderboard. That's where you can say who is a Monopoly tycoon and who is going to go bankrupt. So go get yourself on the charts. Download Monopoly Go, now free on the Apple Store and Google Play. Also, it's playoff time for the NBA. NHL baseball is in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Right now, the Detroit Tigers took 2 out of 3 from the St. Louis Cardinals, and that should have been a sweep, honestly. You can bet on games with Detroit in Yankee Stadium as that series begins this weekend. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you each and every single day to bring you all the biggest stories without all of that screaming and shouting. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinion, and news for streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, Derek, it's top 5 time. This is the way we do this. I'm going to start from 5 and work up to 1. And then if anybody notable gets left out of your top 5, you're going to have to explain that after this is over. But let's start. Who is your number 5 top coach in the Southeastern Conference?
Number 5, I think I'll go with kind of shuffling a couple right now in my head, but I'll go with Mark Stoops right up at Kentucky. I think he's done an incredible job up there from a longevity standpoint with the resources he has to work with. Always been impressed with his teams. They don't ever seem to just be bad, right? That's kind of a new era with Kentucky right now with football, but he always seems to be able to reload. He develops really well. So never the top tier of the SEC as far as his teams go, but I'm always impressed with the job he's able to do year in and year out up there.
Number 4.
Number 4, I will go with Steve Sarkisian, a newcomer to the SEC, right over in Texas. A guy that obviously has a lot of accolades, being the offense coordinator at USC, going to Washington, having success up there before going back to USC as the head coach. And we know things can go a little awry over there at USC when former offensive coordinator returns to be a head coach out there. So I'm not holding that against him, obviously. Comes back to Alabama, does a heck of a job as offensive coordinator, goes to Texas now, and seems to really have those guys rolling, right? Goes into Tuscaloosa last year and beats Nick Saban in Alabama. So, really impressed with the job he's done since he's gotten there. Has really turned that roster over. It's a really impressive deep roster, and but I am ready for them to get into the SEC and see what the grind is really like week in and week out. I think that's going to be a little bit of a surprise to them, but that doesn't take away from how good of a coach that I personally think he is.
Number 3.
I'm going to have to go with another newcomer here and just kind of see how he ends up working, right? DeBoer over there in Alabama, guy that played, made it to the playoffs with Washington, played for a national championship, just a really, really good offensive mind. It's going to be interesting to see how he fits at Alabama. If people are going to buy into his style and stuff like that, right? And then obviously the changing of the conferences. Again, this is a whole nother animal he's going to be dealing with. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Number 2.
Number 2 is our man Lane Kiffin. Lane has obviously done an incredible job with everything that I've said from these other coaches. Great offensive mind. For my money, the best in college football from an offensive standpoint. And he's really grown from a roster building standpoint, right, Stephen? You talk about it, literally every day almost, through transfer portal, recruiting, stuff like that. It really is amazing what he's been able to do, the players he's been able to get to Oxford, and the team that he has in place now too, right? Got some real leaders on this team that's geared up to make a real run at a national championship. Definitely going to be a top, 5, 6, 17 preseason more than likely coming into the year. So anything less than a playoff berth would be a pretty big disappointment. But what Lane's done since he's got to Oxford is incredibly impressive, and I would be hard pressed to find anybody that would think he was any worse than number 2 on this list.
And number 1, a free space, but we'll say it anyway.
Yeah, yes, it's definitely a free space. Kirby Smart, right? He's built an absolute machine over there in Athens. Just dude after dude after dude, give him a lot of credit. But there's a guy in Oxford hot on his tail, and we had to go out there and play him last year, and Kiffin gets his return game this time, and he's beefed up the lines a little bit to look a little better out there with them, as he puts it. So that's going to be a lot of fun when that game comes around. But again, not taking anything away from Kirby. He's obviously an incredible coach, done an incredible job ever since he's got to Athens and built an absolute monster.
And getting Georgia 3 years in a row, because we played them last year, we're going to play them this year, and then we're going to have a return trip to Athens, is kind of going to feel like old times.
Yeah, right. I remember playing them back, in the '90s in particular, right? My dad went and watched them play when Herschel Walker was there, and getting them 3 years in a row, if they were going to do that, they could at least let us hang on to Vanderbilt, couldn't they?
Right.
Yeah,
But the benefit to that is the way they do it. The way Auburn, you got to give Auburn Vanderbilt because they have Alabama and Georgia as their permanent rivals. So, I mean, it makes sense because Auburn's not particularly good. I mean, they talk like they're good, but every year they're seemingly not particularly good. All right, so the coaches that got left off. First of all, Josh Heupel. Why did Josh Heupel not make your list?
It was down between him and Stoops for my number 5 spot. Heupel's obviously done a really good job, but I'm giving the edge to Stoops for his longevity and for keeping Kentucky, which is considered a lower tier program, to Tennessee, which it probably shouldn't be at this point. But he's kept them there longer. Heupel definitely has a chance to end up jumping him with the longevity, but I just am so impressed with Stoops and the way he's been able to keep Kentucky relevant in football for so long since he got there. So it was going to be hard pressed for me to leave Mark Stoops off.
Yeah, and you left Brian Kelly off as well. Why'd you leave Brian Kelly? If you didn't even mention him in that 5-6 conversation, where do you have Brian Kelly?
No, I didn't. Maybe somewhere in the 7-8 range. I'd have to sit down and really think about it. I don't know. I've never been a Brian Kelly fan for whatever reason. You see him with his Notre Dame teams, and it's not an apples to apples comparison, obviously. But every time he would get into a big game with Notre Dame, in particular against an SEC team, would just absolutely get smoked, right? But it can obviously change in a place like LSU, a place that's really invested the way that they are. He's going to be able to get guys there. This will be a big year for me as far as my view of Brian Kelly, with Jaden Daniels gone and bringing in Nussmeier, breaking in a new starting quarterback, even though it's a guy that has been there a couple years, so he has been around the program. I've just never particularly been a Brian Kelly fan, but he can obviously change that with a big year down in Baton Rouge.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Derek Vandygriff, thank you very much for stopping by. And, man, I look forward to seeing you on July 2nd, man.
Oh, yeah. Just let me know what's going on, and I'll do my best to make that drive down.